Well, good morning, everybody, and it's a beautiful morning in St. George. Sun shining brightly. Got a very interesting topic to bring to you today, starting back with some of the history of Mary Jo's family and bringing up to date with her, and then going back with a little history of the Craig family and related families and bringing that up to date until the two of us meet in 1955 at BYU, Brigham Young University. So that's our objective for today, and we'll start with Mary Jo's family. Her first American ancestor coming into the United States was a fellow by the name of John Hopping, Hopping, and that was about 1670. He was married in Long Island, and that gives us our first entry. However, the Hoppings were from southern England, the southernmost part of England, Devonshire, and that they were probably fishermen. That was a famous fishing area, and their fishermen traveled even to the coasts of the United States before it was the United States, up to Newfoundland in Canada, because that was where there was an abundance of codfish, and codfish were widely sought and purchased throughout Europe because of the particular qualities the cod had. They dried better, they stayed better longer. There was no refrigeration in those days. And here is the seaport of Devon with the ship, a replica of the Golden Hind there. The Golden Hind being the ship which Sir Francis Drake sailed around the world, and after which Drake's Bay, just north of San Francisco, was named one point that he touched. So in 1670, the Hoppings are in Long Island, and then they go from Long Island to New Jersey. And then about 1860, there is a Hopping, that the ancestor of Mary Jo, by the name of Ralph Hopping, who went from New York City to California, to the Sequoia forests, and there he settled with his family, and there was born his son, George Redstone Hopping, father of Mary Jo. Mary Jo's father, born in the woods in the Sequoia before it was a national forest, one of the early settlers, as part of a group of people who went in to try to establish a cooperative community called Kauai Colony. And there in those beautiful forests, high mountain sequoia forests, George Hopping grew to 18 years of age, spending his entire years there in the forest, learning about trees, diseases of trees, the bugs, the flora, the fauna, all about that beautiful territory. And George, learning from his father Ralph all about the insects, both became entomologists, the study of insects. George learning from his father Ralph. And so much grew their interest that eventually his father Ralph was hired by the Canadian government to help stop the spread of the bark beetles that were infesting and destroying the forests there in British Columbia. So George, following in his father's footsteps, at age 18 went to the University of California at Berkeley, and then to the University of Oregon, then got a master's degree in entomology at the Iowa State University. And while at the University of Oregon, George meets Lavelle Yantis, who is to become his wife. The two marry and then move to Vernon, British Columbia. Meanwhile, Mary Jo's mother's family, the Yantis, or in Germany known as the Gentes, Gentes, Gentes family immigrated from Alsace-Lorraine on the border between France and Western Germany. And they immigrated to Kentucky, and Kentucky to Missouri, and then from Missouri continued along the Oregon Trail, moving along as homesteaders until they reach moving up to eastern Oregon, where they settled and established a farm. And their home is located in Sumter Valley, eastern Oregon. So, where did Mary Jo's mother, Lavelle Yantis, from Oregon there, and father from California meet? They met at the University of Oregon, where they were both attending the university. And they courted and married, and the family then subsequently moved up to Canada and to British Columbia, and that's where Mary Jo was born. And there's Mary Jo sitting on her father's lap with her brothers and sisters around her. And then at the age of about 15, living in Vernon, British Columbia, the LDS missionaries arrive at the door of the Hopping family. And I'll let Mary Jo tell that part of the story.
Okay. Hello, my family. Had a few requests that I make an appearance, and at the insistence of my husband, here I am. I have appeared, and I might disappear just as quickly. I don't like public appearances. Anyway, I guess it's my turn. Okay. I'll make a correction. I was 12 years old when the missionaries came by our door. And I answered the door. And they introduced themselves. One said, "I'm Elder Belknap," and the other said, "I'm Elder Buse." And I said, "Oh, isn't that interesting? You both have the same first name." And they chuckled. And I thought, why would that be funny? Anyway, they handed me a pamphlet about the first vision of Joseph Smith, and asked me to read it and give it to my mother to read, and my sisters as well. Well, to the family, but Dad and my brother John weren't interested, so they never did get involved with the missionary discussions. Anyway, they taught us for a full year while we were in Vernon, and then my dad was transferred to Calgary, Alberta, and there they continued to teach us, and I was baptized, and my mother, my two sisters, we were baptized in December of '49, and Grandpa was baptized the same year. However, I was still bouncing balls, and he was in the Navy, Coast Guard?
In the Navy.
In the Navy.
Or Coast Guard at that time.
Coast Guard, okay. Anyway.
8 years younger.
Yes.
I get that in there.
Yes, 8 years between us. Anyway, let's see. Where do we go from here?
Let's go over to Calgary. What happened in Calgary? What was your life like there?
I was very unhappy there. I had lived all my life in Vernon. I left all my friends. I guess I integrated fairly well into the school system there because I got an award at the end of the school year in the 9th grade. I think just general proficiency. But I really, really missed my friends. And the home that we moved into in Calgary was a real come down from what we had in Vernon, with a beautiful yard and flowers and all those wonderful things that my dad enjoyed so much cultivating and taking care of.
So it's kind of a step up for your dad and kind of a step down for the family.
Yeah, and I know it had to be hard for Mom, too. And Anyway, I was homesick for a long time. I used to go behind the piano that was stuffed in a little tiny room there and cry.
How about with the church? What happened there?
Well, after we joined the church, you know, that made a huge difference. I started to feel like I belonged. This was my home. And I had some good girlfriends that I met there. And one was a neighbor, Maureen Ursenbach, who is now Maureen Beecher, who has written a lot about the early women of the church, if any of you recognize her name.
Historian.
And Jo Myers Cassie, who also made a name for herself in the medical field. And
so how long did you grew up there? For how, would be from the age of 12 to the age of 17, 18 when you went to BYU?
Yeah, entered and finished high school there at Central High. And then when I was 17, the missionaries always said, when you graduate, you've got to go to BYU. That's the only way you need to go. Just go to BYU. So anyway, that became ingrained, and both Mickey and I went to BYU after we graduated from high school. Decided to stay home the next year, and then after that I went back in 53.
50. Is
that right, or 55?
54.
54.
Probably.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I went back after that year.
And will bring us up to the point where we meet.
And that's when I met Wes.
Okay, we'll stop there for a moment. And here are some photos of Mary Jo, first when she was about 3 years old, then about 12 years old, living still in Vernon at this time. Here, while Mary Jo is still at Central High School on her basketball team, tallest girl on the left, going down to the shortest, and that's with her sisters. Go.
This picture was taken in Vernon on our front porch with my two sisters. I think I was probably about 12, 13 there. Okay,
now we'll shift gears from the Hopping side of the family, Mary Jo's side, to my side, commencing back from when a 90-year-old Craig that we met with back in Ontario about 1957 told us that he knew my great-grandfather personally and of my great-great-grandfather. He said the Craigs came across the Atlantic Ocean in a sailing ship during the potato famine, and so that's where we began. And on this ship was Nancy Knowles Craig, along with several of her sons. In about 1849, during the potato famine, from Northern Ireland, where they were living, in the area of Randallstown, in Ontario, in the area of Norfolk County, Walsingham, and obtained a small piece of property there and began farming. And there was born William Robert Craig, my grandfather, son of James, and at the age of 21 his father died, and then he began moving westward in Canada to the area of around Peterborough, where my dad was born, Wesley William Craig Sr., born in 1898 in Peterborough, Ontario. Then the family moved to Baudette, Minnesota, joining with the Cathcart family, the family of William Roberts' wife, Mary. And in this family reunion picture taken in 1915 in Baudette, Minnesota, my grandfather is in the upper left, male in the upper left corner, William Robert. And my father, Wesley William Craig, is 15 years old at the time in that picture. And then my father, at the age of 18, enlists in the U.S. Army to fight in World War I, sent to France, where he is at the end of the war in 1919. When my dad returns home to Baudette at the end of the war, he discovers that his family has moved to Idaho, to Valley County, Idaho, to work for the Payette Lumber Company, where my grandfather, William Robert, becomes what they call the boss of the woods, or in charge of all of the men in the field who are cutting timber, cutting the trees down. Meanwhile, my mother's family, Ernest and Bessie Harwood, with our 4 children, moved from New York out to Valley County, Idaho, to join with the Logues, and there they build themselves a home. And in this photo, from left to right, is their oldest child, Beatrice, and then Ernest, my grandfather, with his youngest son, George, seated on his lap. And to their right is Bessie, my grandmother, and then Stanley, who's also called Ted, next to him, and then my mother, Louise Irma Harwood. So there in Valley County, Idaho, my dad and my mother meet and marry in 1926. And a year later, 1927, I'm born, and my brother Bob is born, and inasmuch as I've recorded my own history elsewhere, I'll pick up when, after I've joined the LDS Church in 1949, been transferred to Denver, Colorado, then to BYU for a semester, and then on a mission to Uruguay for 2 years, and then returned to BYU 1954, and in 1955 I'm at BYU again, ready for what comes next, which is my meeting with the girl that I'm going to marry. So as I see this lovely girl coming toward me there on the sidewalk, I remembered I had thought I had seen her earlier at a parade where I was sitting on a float, and as we went down the street, I saw this lovely girl down there, and I thought, wow. And here she is walking toward me right now on the sidewalk. So I say something like, hey, I think I've know you from somewhere.
Haven't I met you somewhere before?
Yeah. Haven't I met you somewhere before? Original line.
Okay, there were no other students on the sidewalk at this time, just us, because it was still during class time. Well, when he said, have I met you somewhere before, I had to think. I had met somebody up in the library the night before, very briefly, and I thought, well, maybe he was the one. And I said, well, did I meet you in the library last night? He said, no. And then I said, well, what's your name? He said, Wes Craig. Boing, that rang a bell, because I had seen him, the first time I had seen him was at a dance, a formal dance, and he was dancing with a very lovely, popular girl on campus, Sharon Benson, and he was wearing a black tux.
Daughter of Ezra Taft Benson.
Oh, she was actually a niece.
Niece, okay.
Of Ezra Taft Benson. But he was wearing a black tux and a smooth dancer, and really caught my eye. These enormous, beautiful eyes, too, that I noticed. Anyway, that was that. And the next day, I had an assignment, I was taking a class in home economics, and I had an assignment, and one of my friends in the same apartment house in Heritage Halls where I was living took the same class, and so I went up to to check notes with her, and found out that she was the roommate of this beautiful gal that Wes was dancing with that night. And the phone rang while I was up there, and this Sharon Benson answered the phone. And somewhere in my mind I thought, oh, she said, "Hello, Wes Craig." And in my mind I just knew that that was the guy she'd been dancing with. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. So that's how I learned his name, which was an interesting sequence of events there.
So taking advantage of the situation, asked you your name, and then later on found your phone number and gave you a call and asked you for a date. In fact, 2 dates.
Right.
And I wasn't going to let this opportunity just slide by one day. I mean, let's start this out
And
right.
that was providential.
Providential. Why don't you tell them why it was providential?
It was providential because the first date was a disaster. And he said, had he not asked me for that second date, he probably wouldn't have taken me out again, because he thought I was a cold fish. Well, I was.
I never used the term cold fish. I did not. Any rate, what occurred to me, the first date was to a symphony orchestra. The Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra was playing at BYU, and that was our first date.
Yeah.
And the second date, I was going to take you dancing.
That's right.
And however, before we went dancing, there was a missionary reunion of the Uruguayan missionaries where we sat around and drank mate and had a good time. And your reaction to that was?
Well, I was kind of left out in the cold, and they were talking in Spanish. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. And that was so rude. But if I'd had any gumption at the time, and it's probably a good thing I didn't, because we'd never have got together after that. But I would have just said, forget it.
So
this goes on until midnight. All this
missionary reunion
chattering among themselves. And he said, well, I told you I was going to take you dancing, so I'll take you dancing. There's a little kind of hole in the wall on the way to Springville. It stays open all night, has a jukebox. We can go down there. So away we went, and we ordered a couple of hamburgers, something like that. Wes put some music on the jukebox.
And things began
and
to
started
improve.
dancing, and I guess I started to relax a little, and
conversation went
conversation started, and started to enjoy the evening together.
And before that evening was over.
Yeah, well, he was upset that he'd asked me for the second date.
But before,
so he wasn't very nice when he came to get me that second date. And like I say,
I'm still getting that.
That's why I say it's providential.
Because
Otherwise,
before that night was over, not only had I discovered Mary Jo, but I had received a spiritual prompting.
witness
that this was the girl I was going to marry. I was home after a long 8 years after joining the church and dating a lot of girls, dancing with a lot of girls. All of a sudden, I just felt I was home. Didn't have to look any further. This was it.
And I figured, I wasn't a very good dancer, actually. I
You were
couldn't relax enough. But so I figured, well, gee, he must like me, because I'm not a very good dancer, and he's a great dancer.
Now that we can end with that I was a great dancer, well, that gives an overview, at least, of how we got together and how our lives started together from that point on. Now we'll take you on to just about 6 months later, when we are getting married. So after a 9-month courtship at BYU, we marry in the temple at Cardston, Alberta, Canada, at which my parents My stepfather, Harold Howell, and my mother were able to attend and be there with us at that time. And that was followed by a reception at the home of Mary Jo. All of her close friends were able to be there with us. And in this photo from left to right are Dave and Kay Wilcox, myself and Mary Jo, and Mickey and her husband Hal Warner. And then the cutting of the cake, followed on the next day by both our families meeting at Lake Louise, nearby to Calgary, enjoying ourselves together there. And this is the beginning of our next 56 years together, and still counting.